The 4-Pass Loop is a 26-mile loop located in the Maroon Bells Snowmass Wilderness in Colorado. In this video, I'll go over the general route, permits, and camping, and what you can expect from the overall experience of hiking this iconic trail. So in this video, I'll be doing a quick guide and overview of backpacking the 4-Pass Loop in the Maroon Bells Snowmass Wilderness in Colorado. So I hiked the 4-Pass Loop in June of 2026 in 2 nights and 3 days, and I started from the East Fork Trailhead here north of Crested Butte. So the first important decision you have to make when planning your 4-Pass Loop backpacking trip is which trailhead are you going to start from. Now there are 3 different trailheads that you can start this hike from. Each of them are a bit different. I decided to start my hike from the East Fork Trailhead here north of Crested Butte, really just for ease of access for where I live here in Durango. That was the closest trailhead to drive to, and you can just park your car there for the duration of your trip, and you don't have to pay or anything like that. It's an easy trailhead to get to. The second one you can start from is where most people do, and that is the Maroon Lake day use area here, which you have to get a shuttle from Aspen up here and pay to park your vehicle during the duration of your trip. So that kind of complicates things. The third spot you can hike from is the Snowmass Trailhead out of Snowmass Village, which I believe that you can just park here for free as well, so that would be another good option. This is roughly the route that I took starting from the East Fork Trailhead, which is about 29 miles. I did it going counterclockwise. You could do it clockwise as well. I just chose to do it counterclockwise, which was actually based on when I got permits for. Now, I did add a few miles to my hike as I decided to hike down to Maroon Lake and the Maroon Bells viewpoint down here because I'd never been there and I just wanted to see it. So that added about 3.5 miles because I hiked all the way down and then I hiked all the way back before continuing on with my hike. So I did this hike in 2 nights, 3 days. The first night where I got a permit was for the Maroon Zone, which is just down here. In this area is the Maroon Zone. This is the Crater Lake Zone. So that's a different permit you need for that night. I ended up getting a permit for the Maroon Zone the first night, which means you can camp anywhere in this zone and generally already a designated camp spot, a spot that people have already used. Now I wanted to make it several miles into my hike the first night, so I ended up making about 7 miles, and I camped pretty much right in this area somewhere in a nice camp spot that was off of the trail where, yeah, it was pretty private and it was protected in the trees, which is nice because it was a windy night that first night, so that kind of really helped. The second night, I wanted to camp by Snowmass Lake, so I got a permit in the Snowmass Lake zone, I believe it is, and I camped kind of right up in this area up here. There are loads of spots to camp in the Snowmass Lake zone over in this area and even over here, so I had plenty of options, and that was a great place to camp as well. First day, I started my hike here at the East Fork Trailhead, and it is kind of starting right away, slowly climbing uphill through this forested area, kind of up through here, and then you kind of just keep climbing up into this valley, and this kind of opens up once you start to get close to the tree line, coming up into this area, and then there is a kind of a fork here, and you want to go to the right if you're going counterclockwise like I did. You can also go this way, and there's also a connection point here as well. So I ended up going up here and hiking all the way up this valley, which you get kind of above tree line in this area, which is a really nice spot. It's a little windy the day that I hiked, so as I got higher and higher, it just got windier and windier. West Maroon Pass is here, which West Maroon Pass is about basically exactly 4 miles into the hike, and you start the hike at about 10,400 feet, so it's about a 2,100 foot climb from the East Fork Trailhead up to West Maroon Pass here. Now, it was ridiculously windy the day that I got up to the top of West Maroon Pass. I kind of hid over on this east side of the pass to get out of the wind once I got up there. But it was still pretty nice views looking down valley here. Top of West Maroon Pass, I only had about 3 miles until my campsite. You're pretty quickly dropping in elevation, dropping back below tree line. There was a creek crossing down this way that I had to cross. In late June, there was still a lot of snow melt, so it was pretty high. I ended up just taking my shoes and socks off to cross it because I didn't want to get wet feet overnight and really for the next morning. Ended up finding a camp just below kind of the rough trail they take to get up to Maroon Peak, which is a 14er over there. Ended up being pretty windy that night. Wind rolled in and it blew for several hours overnight. But the next morning I had kind of calmed down, and I did the couple mile, I think it was a 2-mile hike down to Crater Lake down here, which was absolutely beautiful views coming through this area here. Now, like I said earlier, I ended up extending my route by about 3.5 miles because I wanted to go to Maroon Lake to see the Maroon Bells viewpoint because I'd never seen it before. Got very busy in this area here. Got down to the lake, which again, there were loads of people. This is one of those popular places in Colorado, the Maroon Bells viewpoint at Maroon Lake. Took kind of a lunch break down here at the day use area. There's some vault toilets and stuff down there, which is nice. Took a break in this area, kind of the Aspens, and started the very long, steep climb up to Buckskin Pass. At Crater Lake, you're sitting at about 10,000 feet, about 3 miles, but you're literally gaining like 2,400 feet in elevation. And since I had started down at Maroon Lake down here, this was actually the hardest part of the entire hike for me, was the climb up to Buckskin was the absolute hardest part of the hike, in my opinion. It was kind of a long, grueling climb that was pretty steep and kind of exposed in the sun once you got to these higher parts here. But once I finally made it up to the top here, there were some beautiful views looking out to Snowmass Lake, which is where I was going to be camping that second night. Over a 3.5-mile hike from the top of Buckskin Pass all the way to my camp spot down in Snowmass Lake. It was mostly downhill, so after the grueling climb up to Buckskin Pass, which was very slow, I cruised pretty well and quick all the way down here, down to this valley. There was a bit of a creek crossing down here somewhere, but I ended up being able to cross over a log that's put over the creek, so that made that easier. I broke out the trekking poles in this section here because I was really exhausted. I just wanted to get to camp and set up camp and eat dinner and chill for the night. So I ended up getting here, set up camp at Snowmass Lake, which was beautiful. I was absolutely exhausted by the time I got here, so I remember laying down for like 20 or 30 minutes after I'd cooked and eaten dinner. But then I did end up getting down to the Snowmass Lake for sunset, which, to be fair, the lighting was not very good when I was there, but it was still nice to see the lake. So then I ended up going to bed pretty early, got up the next morning, not really for sunrise, but a little bit after sunrise, which was still some pretty good light over the lake in the morning there. And then I ended up starting my, again, pretty long climb from Snowmass Lake up to the top of Trailrider Pass. Exactly 2 miles from my campsite up to Trailrider Pass. It was only like a 1,400-foot climb, so it actually wasn't that bad. Views going up to Trailrider Pass, looking back at Snowmass Lake, are absolutely beautiful. Unfortunately, there was some wildfire haze on the morning I hiked it, so it was a little hazed out, but it was still really nice. Once I got to Trailrider Pass, it was, again, pretty windy up there, but I had the pass all to myself. But I didn't stay very long because of the wind, and then I started this descent down. And this was actually a really nice descent here. Some cool alpine lakes up in this area, so you can see here. That was a really nice alpine lake that I wasn't expecting or even knew that was there, but this was, in my opinion, one of the prettiest parts of the entire hike, was coming down Trailrider Pass and coming down to these alpine lakes down here. Beautiful section of trail. Then you can just keep descending for a couple of miles all the way down into this valley here. This is the valley where the East Fork of the Crystal River is. Once you get down here, I mean, of course it got a bit warmer because you drop all the way down to like 10,200 feet through this section. And it's a very slow climb here for 1.5 miles, which was nice. So it was pretty cruisy through here. Sit areas, so there's some nice shade. Got a little busier in this section. I saw a lot of hikers and backpackers in this section here. Taking a break right in this spot here, right by this waterfall. Had a lunch break. At this point here, I kind of knew I had about 7 more miles to go until I got back to the trailhead. And I think I had about a 3-mile climb up to the top of Frigid Air Pass, the 4th and final pass of the 4-pass loop. Now, from here to the top of Frigid Air Pass, about 2,000 feet. So I ended up just breaking out the trekking poles through this whole 3-mile section here because I was kind of just trying to get through these miles in this climb, and it's a lot easier to climb with the trekking poles, so I kind of did that. It was definitely a relief to get to Frigid Air Pass. It was the 4th and final pass, and also not too difficult. Not compared to Buckskin, in my opinion, the day before. For some reason, that one was just really difficult for me. Hung out for probably 20 minutes, enjoyed the views for the last time. Honestly, I think Frigid Air Pass has some of the best views on the whole loop, I feel like, along with Trailrider Pass, in my opinion. I ended up descending all the way back down to the trailhead, which is about 4 miles. And at that point, I was losing about 2,000 feet of elevation. Pretty cruisy. That was my route of the 4-pass loop, starting from the East Fork Trailhead north of Crested Butte. Some important things to note about backpacking the 4-pass loop is the best time to do it, which is generally late June till early October. This year was a very low snowpack year, so when I did it in late June, I didn't have to actually deal with any snow on the trail. Now, I can imagine on high snowpack years, you'd be hitting snow over these high passes and stuff if it was a big snow year. So that's something to keep in mind. How much snow there is that season is really going to dictate how much snow you're going to have to deal with and what time of the season is going to be best for you to backpack this route. Generally, I would say that fall is probably going to be slower. If you were going to go towards late September, early October, there's probably less people, but you're going to have to deal with colder temperatures and even possibly snow, depending on when you go and, how the weather is that particular season. This is very important. This is the backpacking zone map for the 4-pass loop in the Maroon Bells Snowmass Wilderness. These show the different zones that you would have to get permits in based on where you plan on camping. So here you have the East Fork Zone, the Maroon Zone, Crater Zone, Upper Snowmass Zone, Snowmass Lake Zone, Geneva Lake Zone, and the North Fork Zone. Now you can get permits for any of these zones and you can camp in that zone for that night. Now, like I was saying earlier, I had permits the first night for the Maroon Zone, so I camped kind of down here towards the end of it there. And the second night, I had a permit for the Snowmass Zone because I wanted to camp by Snowmass Lake. Now, that was for 2 nights. If I wanted to add a third night, I could have gone a North Fork Zone or an East Fork Zone or something like that. So you kind of have to just see which zones you would like to camp in, which permits are available for each zone for when you plan on doing it, and then build your trip around which zone you can camp in. And that's going to depend on whether you want to do 2 nights or 3 nights. I personally did 2. Now, another big thing to consider is water for filtering water. Now, like I was saying earlier, there are plenty of creek crossings on this route, so water is generally plentiful. So there's not really a lot of dry patches on this route, to be honest with you. I think the biggest one I can recall would probably be going up from Snowmass Lake over Trailrider down to this area. I don't think there's any water kind of in this area here, this few mile section. So I made sure to fill up my bottles at Snowmass Lake before starting up Trailrider Pass, and that kind of lasted me all the way down to this area. I think when I took my break here, my water lasted me all the way to there. But yeah, water is definitely important to consider. To be honest with you, there's pretty much water accessibility within every mile or couple miles. You pretty much have access to water that you can filter to drink. Now, the next thing you always have to consider on backpacking trips in the high mountains or pretty much anywhere is the weather considerations and concerns. Now, the summertime in the Colorado Rockies, thunderstorms are always something you heavily have to consider, and they can pretty much happen any day in the summertime in the afternoon. Luckily, on my trip, I didn't have to deal with any thunderstorms, and I knew that in the forecast there was no chance of thunderstorms during my trip, so that kind of worked in my favor. But in most cases, there's going to be at least a slight chance of thunderstorms in the afternoons in the Colorado mountains, so it's good to get started kind of early in the morning and try and get to your campsite and just be prepared if there might be any rain or storms coming through. Rain jacket, warmer layers, stuff like that. Just something to research and keep in mind. And check the weather forecast leading up to your trip so you know what you're getting into and what to expect. Altitude is another serious thing to consider when doing this hike. I live in Colorado, so I'm very used to the elevation. I've actually never had altitude sickness or had an issue with the altitude while hiking. But if you don't live in the high elevation like I do, and I'm used to it, then you definitely have to consider the elevation. I think the lowest point on this entire trail is about 10,000 feet, and the highest point is 12,500 feet 4 separate times, because you do 4 passes, and each of them is either 12.4 or 12.5. Altitude sickness can definitely be a thing if you're not used to the elevation, so it's something to keep in mind. Probably good to acclimatize a little bit if you're not living in high elevation. Maybe fly out and spend a couple days in some higher elevation before you start this hike. Another important thing to consider while doing this hike is that in the Maroon Bells Snowmass Wilderness, bear canisters are a requirement on this backpacking trip, so I have a bear vault that I use to store all of my food and trash and all that stuff during my hike, so you will have to get a bear canister when doing this loop. And one last thing is kind of obvious, but just pack out all of your trash and everything when you're doing hikes like this. Don't leave anything out there and kind of ruin it for everybody else. Take care of the wilderness, respect it, and you'll probably have a good time. And also, another thing I liked about doing this loop is that it is relatively busy, which someone could see as a downside, but the upside of that is I got to chat with plenty of other hikers and backpackers when I was on this trip, which was really cool. I mean, I did this by myself, so I was mostly kind of stuck with my own thoughts, but I did get to talk to many different people on the trail that I saw multiple times or just once, and that was a pretty cool experience. Anyway, I hope this video and guide was helpful if you are planning your own trip to backpack the 4-pass loop. If so, leave a comment down below the video. If you've hiked the 4-pass loop before, let me know what your experience was and what you thought of it. I think that's it for me today. Thanks for watching, you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.